Welcome back to the Training Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tyler Martinovich, and joining me are my two compatriots.
I'm Hilary Weber.
And Jesse Brock. Hey.
Hello, ladies. Are you enjoying the miserable weather outside?
No.
No. It is currently, I think, 112 today, and has been for
miserable.
like 10
and
days.
I'm already a sweaty person, and I'll take that times two.
Yeah, it has not been fun. We are going to keep this short for the intro because we have a great interview coming up. Who are we interviewing today?
Michael Martz. Michael Martz is a creative director and has worked on a bunch of big clients here locally. But we know him from Second Screen Cult Cinema. And we've been sponsors of theirs for how long now?
5 years, maybe 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, I joined about 5 years ago. So yeah, I try to make as many as possible. And it's a really fun event.
Yeah, it's a monthly series where we curate a cool cult film that we hope people will come out to see, something that's underseen, underappreciated. It's been our ethos from the beginning, and believe it or not, we're into 9 years of this. So I've been there from the beginning, or just about.
And people are still showing up.
Yeah, they are, believe it or not.
Yep.
We're always surprised when there's an audience.
Well, the screenings are always followed by a really nice conversation,
Yep.
so that's always a bonus.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about cult films because we get into it with our interview here in a little bit, but we'll be on the backside. So stick around. We'll be right back with Michael Martz. Welcome back to Loose Frame Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Martinovich, and joining me is my friend, Michael Martz. Hey, buddy.
Hey, how's it going, Tyler? Hello, everybody out there.
It is another morning in Tampa Bay. I think the temperature is 109 today.
It's 175 degrees. I've looked at my thermometer right when I walked out this morning.
So interesting enough, not that this is happening contemporaneous to the podcast, but yesterday was the first day of school, and they had to cancel recess because the blacktop was melting. They recorded a temperature of 177 degrees, and blacktop melts at 120, if you can believe it.
I believe it. I mean, I've been out there, for work a couple of times. We've had a couple of events, a couple of activations, and out there for 6 hours in the heat, and you have to hydrate the entire day before and the day of, and even still, it's just it's just sweltering.
It's awful. Come to Florida.
Yeah, visit Florida, everyone.
But luckily, you have a job that keeps you inside most of the time.
It's true.
AC is good. You are a creative director.
I am.
We'll explore what that means here in a second, but talk us a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get into art, graphic design, copywriting?
That's a great question. I'll try to keep it as condensed as I possibly can. So I grew up in St. Pete. Was not born here in the state. I came from the north. I was born in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Came down here.
I've known you for over 10 years, and I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I wasn't there very long. My father was a minister for the Lutheran Church. So anyway, him and my mom met, had me. Moved down here. Well, there's more to it than that. I'm not going to get too personal with this. There were some life-altering events, some very tragic. But we ended up. My family came down here in '88. So grew up in St. Pete. Seen a lot of change on both sides of the bay here. I've now lived in Tampa just as long as I was in St. Pete. So been here, well, maybe even longer at this point. But I've been in the Bay Area since. I can't do math right now, but a long time, over 30 years.
Yeah.
A lot of change. But in terms of your question, art-wise, I was an illustrator. I used to draw all the time as a kid. Then I got really into writing and journaling and that sort of thing. And then I figured out one day, and of course I was a huge music head and a big movie buff even as a kid, watching like Charlie Chaplin films and Marx Brothers, just weird stuff that kids my age were not watching.
Yeah.
Just having this, and this is pre-internet days too, so it was especially unusual.
Yeah,
I had to rely
you had
on
to actually hunt those things down.
St. Pete, one of the St. Pete libraries down, in the city, where I had access to a lot of great VHS tapes and world cinema and things like that. So, but one day I figured out, wait a minute, I can get paid for all this, all this knowledge and all of this experience that I've accumulated. So, did not really expect to go into advertising. It started as marketing. I went to USF here in Tampa, and my major was marketing, and then eventually that led to led to advertising. So worn a lot of hats since then. I cut my teeth as a copywriter and as a graphic designer. It did get to a point where I realized that even though I was dangerous enough with design, there were far more talented designers than me. They could do it way faster. That was the big clincher.
Yeah.
But I've worked with so many different creatives at that point, just cross-functionally across all these great, talented teams, that I just, it just kind of naturally happened, getting to that level on the CD side, the creative director side.
What was your first job in the advertising world? Like, where did you actually start at?
So first job, I was with it wasn't an agency, it was an in-house real estate company. So I was with an in-house marketing team. I started off as a marketing coordinator, which was a nice way of saying, hey, you have 10 jobs. Like, you're going to be the copywriter, you're going to design billboards.
And get coffee in between.
By the way, here's $10 million for a budget we have. You're going to do media buying and planning as well, which was like, what is happening? So once I got that bump, I'm like, make me a marketing manager. But again, this is just a title. It didn't really carry much weight when I was 20, 25, 24 years old. But it did throw me into the fire of, what it takes to run a marketing team. And then at one point I had to run a print shop. So it got into print production on that side and managing that team and those insane schedules and being responsible for this very expensive equipment. And then at that point, just kind of, I went from there and worked for a couple other companies on the marketing side, still was writing and everything. And the recession hit 2008, got laid off because of that. I was at the Tampa Bay Times right around that period. That was on the advertising side, but it was more like almost like account. It was an account exec job is what I was doing. So even though sales is something I never really cared to do, it just, when you talk to people and listen to people, sometimes you're like, oh, you can be a salesperson. It's like, well, not really, but I think I was okay at it. But recession hit. What do we do next? So my wife, Amy Martz, and I co-founded Martz Creative in 2009, and that's still going. She's more on the commercial and architectural photography side, and she's an artist. On top of that, an amazing photographer. And then I was running all of the kind of the business ops and the creative side, creative direction and all that.
Well,
and
speaking of having too many hats, I mean, I think that's basically how you define a creative director. Let's at least set the table for what a creative director actually does.
Sure. I think the most important thing a creative director does is mentor and nourish the creative team. A lot of you have to be a little bit older. Unfortunately, I know there's some young, insanely talented people out there that will be creative directors one day. And I've had this experience with some more junior team members working that they have this idea that they're a great designer now, maybe even possibly an art director, that they're ready to be a creative director on like a 3-year track. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying that it does take time to get to that level, and you have to wear a lot of hats. Some people get there differently. Some people are just copywriters and then become creative directors. Some people are just purely design the whole way, and there's really no wrong way to go about it. But to really synopsize what a creative director does besides mentor the team and the talent and make sure they get, they elevate their career path, is I have to work across, it's a cross-functional position. You roll up your sleeves a lot. There's a lot of new business pitching involved. It's coming up with great ideas and concepts, and not even yourself. It's actually being able to identify the best idea, no matter where it comes from.
Yeah.
And that gets into kind of the creative process itself. But really, I'm just in charge of making sure every project is on time and on budget, and all of the creative, whether it's copywriting, design, websites, video production, everything is not just on concept, on budget, and at the highest quality.
Yeah.
So
thinking back through your career working under a different creative director, was there something that a mentor or someone you worked for, doesn't have to be a mentor, you don't have to even like the person, but there was something that you learned from someone along the way that you've implemented into your own style of being a creative director?
That's a really great question. So I actually, the reason why I'm so big on mentorship now is because I never actually had a great mentor. It was just, I don't know if it was just the time that my career was taking off in, and maybe it was partially me not seeking that out. I actually have a mentor now, but I didn't back then. So that's a tricky question, but I did learn from other creative directors out there, just kind of not so much philosophically, but just what the job entailed, realistic expectations. And you have to really pick and choose where you're getting that advice from, because just like any industry in any position, there are some toxic people out there that are not giving good advice at all, or they're being overly critical and not empowering the talent to actually help. I have a completely different mindset. I know there's some real hard ass CDs out there. So what makes a good creative director, in your opinion? A good creative director. That's another great question. I think that, and we were talking about this before we started rolling, and I swear to God, I'm not trying to sound elitist at all. I think the best thing you could possibly do is try to consume as much art and as many films and as much cinema and as much music and as many books as possible. Because what that's doing is not only are you building your taste, which is a huge part of the job, but it's that ability to recognize all these different styles and eras and periods and even getting into like font families and things like that. Like you really need to kind of expand that kind of pop culture vocabulary and
do you see that as just the curation of the art you expose yourself to?
Absolutely. I mean, I've said it to people, and I've said it quite very less eloquently. What a creative director is to me is I feel like sometimes I'm just a glorified editor and curator a lot of the time. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. I'm getting in the weeds with sometimes I have to rewrite scripts. I'll have to really get in the weeds and do some of the work myself sometimes if the deadline is that tight and we're just not getting there as a team. It's rare because with the right coaching and the right, kind of touch points along the process, everything's smooth.
Yeah.
But no, absolutely. I think that curatorial ability that pulls from that experience and all of that consumption of all of those beautiful things out there. It's really just trying to bring as much, and what I try to do is just try to bring as much, beauty into something that's not really known. This is commerce, like this is advertising. There's a self-awareness that you have to have. And, I really think that you can't ever forget who your audience is, no matter what project it is you're doing.
Yeah, we were talking before the camera started rolling about the Bud Light debacle and how they're trying to right the ship.
Right.
And that was a company that just was not reading the tea leaves of their own audience.
It's just kind of losing sight of it. I mean, a company like Bud Light or even Disney, any huge company, they're just so massive. They're almost unconceivably massive. Like how big are these? They're so big that they don't really, like, one arm may not know what the other arm is doing necessarily. And I think when they get really into strategy and planning, that it can be tricky. Like it's to kind of use I don't know if this analogy will land, but you obviously who George Clinton is and James Brown. So they talk about the one, you go back to the one every time. And then now they're talking about the one in terms of the music count, right? Like, you gotta always go back to that one. Well, that philosophy is the same. Like the one is your audience. Like what's the project? Are you making a commercial? Like who's the target audience? Or maybe it's maybe you're doing something, maybe you're doing a podcast, for example. Like you always have to remember who that audience is.
So thinking back, you don't have to be specific as far as an individual client. I don't want to call anyone out, but is there a brand that is doing it well right now and is really understanding their audience and communicating with them effectively that you look at and say, wow, more companies should be doing this?
Everyone has been this is kind of getting beaten to death at this point, so this shouldn't be news to anybody, but I think Liquid Death is doing a great job right now. And I think it's because of their core philosophy. They don't look at themselves as a like a bottled water company.
Yeah.
Canned water company. They look at themselves as an entertainment company. And not to really my surprise, most of those guys were advertising people. Copywriters, creative directors, art directors, and it shows. They come in, they identified the problem that, a lot of people don't want to drink all the time, but they still want to meet their friends at the bar.
Yeah.
How do we combat that? Like for me, I've even had that experience where, I was on the event circuit for a while, going on all these events. The beer is usually awful. The wine is terrible. And then you can't drink scotch maybe you can. You can't drink scotch all the time. I certainly couldn't. So what I had to do is I would just hey, just give me a tumbler and just put make like a pineapple, non-alcoholic, whatever. just so you're holding
Something,
something.
yeah.
There's this weird psychological thing with that, and they figured that out. It's like, oh, we'll just make a can that looks like a craft beer can.
Yeah, and I think they own every big festival space on the planet.
They're
at the
everywhere,
moment.
and very quickly. It was a very quick trajectory for those guys. And I think that that's just knowing who the audience was, and it's a very broad audience in their case. I mean, there's even kids out there who feel cool holding these cans like they're drinking with their parents and the adults.
So what are some pitfalls that you see other companies running into, or impulses that other agencies or creative directors can fall into that's actively hurting their engagement or the brand?
I think this kind of taps into a much bigger, and by the way, this is what creative directors do all the time. We overthink everything. It's part of the job. You have to question the questions, overthink everything, for the betterment of the projects. But I think that one of the biggest issues, really, and not just in advertising. I mean, I would say in the film industry, everywhere, the word content is such a words have power, and people kind of don't think that because we all talk so much shit all the time. That it like words have power. When we say content for everything, it devalues the work, and I'm seeing that everywhere, and I'm seeing the work kind of suffer for it because now everything's being commoditized to the point where, like, even films that are these amazing pieces of art are just like, oh, it's just content.
Yeah.
Like, so that means we're equivalating, the next Citizen Kane or something,
Right.
which is, I don't know even know what that is.
No, that's a great observation where we've just devalued and been so reductive of the word that it's just a widget now.
Yeah, and I think and I think it's the origin story of when that word really started to get used in all these industries. I think it was probably just some web developer who just was looking for content for the page.
Yeah.
And then it kind of bled into social, but now it's everywhere. It's across the corporate hemisphere, and it is really. I think that's concerning because all the problems I'm seeing kind of start there.
Yeah.
That at its core, that's where it is, and then it sprawls out like in this kind of family tree kind of thing of all these other issues where, again, forgetting the audience. Strategy maybe not, might not be the most sound strategy, needs a little bit more work. They stray from their brand character.
Yeah.
Do
you think that's where the impulse to use AI is coming from, where it's just this drive to put out as much content as possible? They don't value the content, they just want the mass of it.
Exactly. And I think what's going to happen, at least in the advertising industry, is it's going to splinter a little bit more. I'm already seeing it. There are layoffs everywhere, and the layoffs are hitting the creatives the hardest. Because I think not all of them, I think the bigger medium-sized shops, even local shops, there's a few that very much understand the value of creativity. So I think those are safe, but there are a lot of other agencies, some tout themselves as marketing agencies and not advertising, but they're trying to leverage AI instead of, having a full creative team like you normally would. And, I'm not anti-AI necessarily. I think that as a tool, it can be used. I've used it for brainstorming. It's dog shit most of the time, but there might be a kernel of like a word that I'll be like, cool, I'll take that word and I'll move on and I don't need you anymore. I think the problem is all these companies now are starting to realize, oh, wait a minute, we don't have to pay health insurance or salaries for these employees. We'll just leverage AI. And I think what they're going to find is like, in advertising, what do we really sell? Ideas and concepts are that's what I spend most of my time as a CD selling, ideas and concepts for campaigns, for video commercials, for whatever it is. But really we're selling deliverables. We're selling creative assets, videos, podcast episodes, websites, on and on and on and on. And to make those, when you're buying those, you want it to be the highest quality possible and you want it to be, aligned with whatever your brand is. AI can mimic that to an extent, but it's, unless you're like, an accounting firm or something, not to single out accountants. Yeah. There's some more, I'm sure there's some trailblazers out there kind of disrupting the industry. But, you're going to see a lot of brands looking very homogenous, and there's going to be a lot of sameness and staleness to it. Computers can't cry, folks. So that, there's no wellspring of experience there.
I don't know why. Someone pointed out the other day, at the end of an article, an actual news article, it said, generated in part by by AI.
Yeah.
And I started looking back through some other articles, and it was like 60% of the things I clicked on in the last couple of days were all generated by AI.
Yeah.
I started rereading some of these things like, oh, this is clearly written by a robot.
Yeah, no, you'll start to
Like the syntax is correct, but there's nothing behind it.
And you're a sharp person. You're gonna catch on that right away. I think the general public, it'll take a little bit more time, possibly a couple years, but eventually they're gonna figure it out too. Like this, I don't want to read this because all this seems the same.
Yeah.
There's no voice, and people will argue with me, and they'll be right to an extent. It's all how you prompt it. If you're using Chat GPT, it's all how you prompt it. But even still, it's still mimicking emotion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a much bigger conversation.
Do you think there's going to be a cultural backlash against companies, corporations, brands that maybe go a little too hard into AI, and people are like, hey, this is not creative anymore. There's no human component. You're hurting people's jobs.
Yeah. I think Hollywood is a good place to start looking. We haven't seen it full force yet, but people are going to have to vote with their wallets. They're going to have to vote. If you don't think the quality is up to something that you want to consume, then don't consume it.
Yeah.
And we've always had that freedom. No matter how aggressive the marketing is, like you don't have to consume it. No one's forcing you to do it. So I'm hoping that the backlash is just people just starting to ignore it, because there is a lot of noise out there in general.
Not to get too nerdy, but Wizards of the Coast, which makes it a bunch of different card games and board games and everything, is like a huge backlash because they got using AI generated art for most of their cards, and the community just went nuts on them, and they had to revise their mission statement as a company, as a brand, and basically last week said, like, we promise we'll never use AI for any of our art or any of our content. And it just got me thinking, like, man, if it's the point where people are literally having to put that in their mission statement, they're not going to do that, then the culture is surprising me in a good way in this case, because they're like, hey, we don't want this.
That's a great example. No, I mean, I would hope to see more of that. I think on the business side, people are just going to shrug and just, keep scrolling, because a lot of it's digital advertising anyway. Yeah. And, digital advertising is so limited a lot of the times, you can't get as creative as like, event activations or things like that.
But you brought it up earlier, the idea of taste, and AI can't have taste.
No, it depends on the taste of whoever's prompting it. Yeah. Really. If I say reference The Godfather, you're just going to get the corniest shit imaginable. Yeah. I'm sure there are exceptions, so any pedants out there, feel free to prove me wrong. But a lot of the time, the vast majority of the time, it's great if you're just looking for SEO juice for like a website or something, and you want to have ChatGPT just, vomit out some stuff that really no one, damn well no one's going to read anyway. It's just search engine crawling stuff.
So let's get away from AI. I don't want to depress too many people here.
Let's as a culture get away from AI.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially from someone in the film industry, like it's going to hurt us in the long run. But going back to just the idea of a creative director. So you mentioned it takes experience, it takes time, it takes taste, and I think when you're saying taste, it's really knowing when to hold back.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So what are some recommendations for someone who's getting started in the industry? They're listening to the podcast at USF right now, and in the Moomba College of Business, or they're looking to go into advertising, or maybe they just want to write copy. They really like copy. So what are just looking at your own past, what are some good practices to implement?
Well, on the copywriting side, write every day. Like, even if it's just journaling whatever boring shit you did for the day, write it down. I like to carry around, and wait, this is a video podcast. This is my big prop moment.
Yep.
Hang on, if I can reach
prop comedy.
Oh, I can't reach it.
It's out of the way.
Anyway, I have a yellow legal pad back there. I've embraced digital, 1,000%, but I also like to, I embrace some analog too. I like to carry around a yellow legal pad because I don't like typing on my phone all the time, because I manage social media shit too, and that gets old really quickly. But when you have an idea, it's important to write it down right away. No matter what you're doing, even if you're a designer or if you're a web developer, like you can't force ideas to come. You can really focus hard, and then you could go take a walk out, on the beach or in the woods or, wherever you are, and an idea will just hit you. That's how it works. And having something to jot that down is super important. Even if it's the worst idea you've ever had, it could spark another idea that's much better. So I would say, number one, the most basic, and this is more of a creative process and less of a CD thing, write it down. Just don't, because you will forget it. you will forget it. So I think carrying something, whatever you're comfortable with, whether it's a tablet or a smartphone or a yellow legal pad like myself and a pen, write it down, because I have lost probably 2 or 3 huge ideas because I wasn't doing that, and that was that was enough for me to be like, okay, this is not going to happen again.
Yeah. I like the idea of just writing to write, though. I think too many people wait for inspiration, and they will never find that inspiration, or they'll never get the motivation.
It's like exercising, like, going to the gym or running or something. You have to keep, those muscles kind of moving, and, that way that muscle memory kicks in, and then you can really kind of get those gains, so to speak. So just, even if it's just keeping, like I said, a little journal or something, or maybe you had this idea, or maybe, an exercise I used to like to do was, if I was walking around, especially in a city that I didn't live in, if I was visiting, I would overhear things walking around and just write down this little line of dialogue here or there, and then you can come up with these whole stories behind that, and then sometimes those lead to other ideas. So just little things like that. Find an exercise and stick to writing it.
As far as managing, what are some best practices, in your own opinion, when you're handling a team?
So, there's all kinds of stereotypes about creatives being these very thin-skinned, emotional people, and some of them are, but so are salespeople, so are executives. I mean, let's be honest here. Really, it's just kind of, there's this level of respect that you have to remember where you came from yourself, and know that some people are inherently gifted and they can do one thing spectacularly, but without having 15 years plus to back it up. Some don't, and they build to that, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone's on their own journey, and everyone's on their own kind of, growth table.
Yeah.
So, I think just being respectful of that, and, really recognizing the good ideas and focusing on them, and not taking a giant, dump on the ideas that maybe aren't great.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, you can tell them they're not great, but not like, beat it into their face.
People want to be heard, I think is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People just it's just empowerment.
Yeah.
Like, look, like, that's not so great. There's something with this idea. Work on this a little bit more. Maybe try this. That kind of thing. So it's just that ability to really kind of recognize that these are, these were you, years ago. This was you, and I think about like how I didn't have a mentor, and how I didn't really have as much hands-on people. I was kind of thrown to the wolves, and that helped me to a degree, but it also kind of sucked at times.
Yeah.
So just kind of remembering that, and kind of righting the wrongs basically, and trying to help them move forward.
Yeah,
so.
just because you had it tough doesn't mean you have to make everyone.
Yeah, I hate that mentality.
Tough. Yeah,
like, you know what I mean. It's just like, well, it sucked for me, so I'm going to make it suck for you.
Yeah, I never understood.
Cool.
That.
The cycle of abuse goes on and on forever. Amazing.
So we're gonna take a hard right turn here.
All right.
When I originally met you was because of a cult cinema group called Second Screen.
Yeah.
It's been around now for over 9 years, or it is the 9th year.
It is yes, we co-founded it in, myself and my co-founder, Annalisa Musoki Taylor, co-founded it in December 2014, and we had our first screening on February 2015.
Multiple Best of the Bay winner. I guess you mentioned growing up, you hunted down old eclectic films like Charlie Chaplin. Not that that's old, or well, it is old, but it's not eclectic. Like, I think everyone should know Charlie Chaplin.
Sure.
But I'm surprised that a group like that is around 9 years later. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing.
Yeah.
But there is a hunger out there to see cult films. So let's talk just real briefly about cult films.
Yeah.
So what makes a cult film?
Cult film, so at its essence, a cult film is just a film that you see that's just out of the ordinary enough for you to really want to share it with somebody, like recruit them into the cult of this film. Like, so you are, at that point, you're a cult member and you're recruiting other cult members. But what makes it? Now, we've held a panel at the Gasparilla Film Festival about this very subject. It was called Cult Cinema 101 back in 2017. Some of you out there may have been there. Apologies if you were. I may have rambled a little bit. Shocker there. But really, it could be anything. What makes a cult film is it's unconventional, it's unforgettable. Maybe the subject matter could be lurid. Maybe the performances are over the top. It could be anything. It could just be a really fantastic movie that didn't get its just due at all. Like maybe it was a box office failure. or maybe the critics all, kind of, it was just critically maligned, and it did not really get the chance to really shine.
Not that every creative director or artist out there needs to watch cult films, but I do think there's something to be said about watching a breadth of movies, viewing a breadth of art and music, adding to that tapestry of what makes you. Even if there's things you don't like, you're still going to walk away with something if you're thinking about it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it spurs ideas all the time. I mean, that's there was a campaign I worked on a couple of years back for, I think it was for either Sparksu or Big C when I was the vice president. I think it was at Sparksu at that point, where, I had this whole idea of, retrofuturism. And what inspired that was the theatrical poster of Logan's Run with these amazing, retrofuturistic illustrations on there. And that was the campaign, like that essence was the campaign. And that came out of nowhere. But again, if I hadn't seen that, or if I hadn't, been familiar with the iconography or anything, it wouldn't have been anything at all. Yeah. Like, it could have gone in a completely more boring, less interesting direction.
So watch films, kids out there. I'm amazed. I mean, I taught for a while, just how little some students actually go out of their way to track down old films or see them. It's like, why am I making a Ghostbusters joke and you've never seen Ghostbusters? Now, granted, most of the kids I was teaching were like born in 95.
Well, that's the thing too. I mean, I'm not that old. I don't want to date myself here, but there was a moment when I had a team of about 14 people and I went on a call and I made a Max Headroom reference.
They had no idea who Max Headroom
everyone,
was.
all the young creatives gave me this kind of, bullshit courtesy laugh. Like, I know you didn't know what I meant.
You have no idea who
so
Max
Headroom
is.
I stopped the meeting and I brought up Max Headroom.
We're going to interrupt this broadcast right now.
I'm like, we're stopping the meeting. I'm going to pull up YouTube and share my screen, and we're going to watch, because this was all on a Zoom call. We're going to watch Max Headroom. Matt Frewer doing the classic Max Headroom. I think it was like a Pepsi ad or something like that. Yeah. And they immediately got it. And they're like, oh, because I was referencing it for an idea, and they were like, oh, like vaporwave. I'm like, sure, of course. Sure.
Make up another silly
I'm
name.
like,
Go
it is.
ahead.
I'm like, but it's proto vaporwave. Yeah. But anyway, exactly. So no, that has. I realized years ago that I'm not normal, and I don't mean that like I'm like a psychotic person. I just mean that someone's laughing back there because they know that's like I am psychotic, completely psychotic. I was shocked at how many people, even in year one of second screen cult cinema, but we were programming that entire year, which were a monthly film series, so it's just one a month.
Yeah.
We were showing stuff like Brazil and, I think Clockwork Orange, that might have been year two, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. To us, those are like Cinema 101, they're great films, but it's like, they're not obscure. That's pretty, that's pretty accessible stuff, pretty easy. And some people would come up and they're like, oh, I've never seen this. Like what? This is like, that's like one of the first movies you watch. What are you talking about? So, and that, I think that was when it really dawned on me that, oh, we're not normal. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that there's so many people out there. And it's not that they're intellectually lazy. It's just that, especially with the younger generations, I've noticed, though there are many exceptions to that. I noticed it on my teams where they don't consume enough media. And if you're going to be in the creative field, I think it's essential. You have to do that. And it needs to go beyond 1990. It needs to be before then. There's this constant, even in music, because I'm a big music guy. There's this constant impulse to just follow the new. But here's the thing about the new. The new is old.
Yeah, the new is
like a year.
Inevitably, but it's also inevitably referencing something that came before it.
Always, everything is indebted to something else. Something you could tell the influences. You can spot the influences on new stuff because they were influenced by something too. They were inspired by something too. We're living in post modern times, so everything is kind of this kind of confluence of ideas coming from
speaking of intellectually lazy, like when it comes to Christmas, like the first thing I get most of like former students or people I know, I always get them a Criterion subscription for the year.
That's
because
fantastic.
It's like you can sit there all day and see 100 movies that you maybe never even heard of before, especially if you don't try to expose yourself to stuff.
And this goes back to AI again, sorry. But those are curated by film lovers, and it shows. Like if you had an algorithm do that, you're going to wind up with Netflix recommendations like that don't make sense half the time.
Guess what, folks? The top 10 most watched Netflix films. There's no data behind that. That's just Netflix pushing those particular movies that month.
100%. And again, and it's not even a human doing it. It's AI taking the data and just kind of like, here you go, shitting it out for you.
Yeah.
And to me, that's intellectually lazy because there's no intellect. It's just a robot doing it. It's just AI doing it. But Criterion, since you brought that up, they are one of the few, maybe one of the only streaming services that actually curate these collections, and they even did a collection on AI, which was fantastic. So and there's a new one we just showed at Second Screen. We screened Roger Corman and Paul Bartel's Death Race 2000, and I brought up how just as of right now, maybe not contemporaneous when this airs, but there's a great Roger Corman collection curated for Criterion Channel called Grindhouse Gothic, and it's all these great 1960s Technicolor Vincent Price movies, all based off of Edgar Allan Poe.
I feel like that was like our counter to Hammer films during the same time.
Oh, it was great. Yeah,
it was awesome,
and they're fantastic films. But no, I think that's a great example of human versus AI, kind of curation.
Good. Well, with that, we got to wrap it up. Unfortunately, it's been great talking with you. If people want to know more about you or want to see what kind of good taste you have, what's your social media handles?
So on Instagram, I'm Mr. Attention. That was a DJ name. I used to DJ a while ago. And I think you spell out Mr. Mister Attention on there, or just look up Michael Martz. I'm on there.
He's not a narcissist. I've known him.
No, it was actually an insult that was thrown my way in college by a good friend of mine. I gave him shit about not taking notes in it was like economics mass lecture hall class or something. And they're like, oh, excuse me, Mr. Attention.
It's a great DJ name.
But yeah, anyway, you can just look up Michael Martz on either Facebook or Instagram. I don't do X or Twitter or whatever it is now, or, not with it. I'm on Spotify
or whatever those things are.
I make a lot of playlists on Spotify, maybe on there. That's the most interesting place.
Yeah. We didn't get into your musical taste, but yes, follow him on Spotify. Always surprising what he's pulling out of the crate.
Yeah. And then Second Screen, I got to plug them too. Second Screen Cult Cinema. If you Google that, you'll find us. But we're on Instagram, Facebook. We did have a Twitter account. I don't think we still do. Spotify. We're on LinkedIn for some reason.
And for those living locally, it alternates between the both sides of the bay. So we're at Screen Door in Ybor City or Greenlight Cinema over in St. Pete.
Yeah, two great theaters. Support independent movie theaters, please. They need you now more than ever.
Yes, they do.
But no, thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
I appreciate you. And for those watching, we'll be right back. And we're back. Well, that was a great conversation.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think he's our first creative director I think we've interviewed on the podcast.
I think so. I went back and I think he's the first.
And something that I was reminded of, he actually did the branding for our podcast, and I totally forgot about that.
Yep, I gave him one of the loose framing stickers, and he was like, well, this looks familiar.
So I was like, wait, oh, he did do the branding for us. Yeah. So
that's why we're so cool.
Yeah. I totally forgot about that. But let's jump in the conversation. We can talk about AI if you guys want to, but I think the end of the podcast, we're talking about, cult films is kind of where I want to start at.
Yeah.
So we sort of defined it on the podcast, but how would you guys define a cult cinema or cult film?
You want to start with that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's always a little bit of debate over what actually constitutes a cult movie. Yeah. I tend to think of it as something that wasn't really a big box office hit initially, but maybe has had more success through a video release, DVD release, or there's some sort of cultural phenomenon attached, like Rocky Horror Picture Show, where there's some kind of like experiential thing that's tied into it. Yeah. That's how I see cult movies.
Yeah. In preparing for this podcast, I was trying to figure out if there was a definitive, explanation for what makes a cult movie. And there's cults, but I think that those are fandom. Like you think about like a Harry Potter and like they're wearing robes and they're quoting the movie, and that's more of like a fandom. But I mean, in the same essence, I feel like a cult movie is like, for example, we just screened Tombstone, which is one of my family and I's favorite movies, and therefore we can quote pretty much the whole thing. But we were in a room with people who were having that same experience growing up and same experience watching that movie over and over. So they were all quoting the movie while we were watching it. And it's really fun to do that, to just kind of have that connection with someone.
It almost became like a Mystery Science Theater or even like a Rocky Horror Picture Show where like there's a call and response, contemporaneous to you watching it in the room.
So to me, because of the word cult and because of like just everyone kind of enjoying the same thing at the same time and feeling connected because of it.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it is to me.
I mean, you don't have to be an elitist and say, oh, Harry Potter's not cult. I mean, it can be for somebody.
I'm going to be elitist, and I don't think it's a
No,
cult movie.
okay. I think what
Way
defines,
too mainstream for
I
that.
think what defines a cult movie is it makes you want to proselytize the people around you. I mean, it's something that means something to you, that you find of value, or there's, it's something funny or inside that you want to bring others into that circle to share with you, right? And I think that's why a group like Second Screen Cult Cinema is, even though I said it was surprising when people show up on the podcast, but it's also not, because people want to share things with each other, and that's what we try to do through the program is expose people to something they probably wouldn't have sought out on their own.
And me personally, I have gotten a lot out of attending these events. I had never seen Paris is Burning until I watched it with Second Screen Cult Cinema, and that changed, like, it literally changed my life. Like, I really loved that whole experience. I mean, we had people flying down from New York City to come screen it with people that they know from the area, and it was just really uplifting, and hearing all the things that they had to say after the screening. And Lady Snowblood was another one for me, where it was basically what Kill Bill is based off of, and that was something I didn't know and that I learned. And then Get Carter, Michael Caine. He's not just working with Batman, guys. He had a whole career before that.
Just don't watch Jaws 4.
Yeah. Stay away from some of them. But yeah, to me, I get a lot out of attending those. And I think it is kind of a communal experience. And that's why it is cult cinema. You don't get as much watching it by yourself.
Well, and I also mentioned, to be an artist, you really need to expose whatever your art medium might be. It could be film, could be painting, whatever, but you really need to expose yourself to other artists that came before you. You have a breadth of knowledge of people working in that space. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, where did your breadth of knowledge when it comes to film come from? Like, where did you start?
Well, I think I was initially like a sort of theater and writing kid, and then I really started getting into film in high school, and that was when I decided like that was what I wanted to do. And I just started watching every movie I could get my hands on from the library. This was when Netflix was still mailing out DVDs. So I just started watching hundreds of movies. And I think the year before I went off to film school, I watched like 500 films. And so even now I track everything on Letterboxd. I've seen over like 3,200 films, I think. And that doesn't include short movies. That doesn't include stuff that's like not on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, just trying to get like a sheer volume of movies ingested.
About you?
That's really important. I love the whole conversation that you had about taste and how that's what it takes to be a creative director or a marketing person, or just better at collaborating in general, just pulling from somewhere. And where better to start than inspiration from the people that came before you. And I liked what he said about he was a really weird kid and he was watching things that not every other kid was watching. I definitely related to that. I don't know about you guys, but I know that I grew up going to theme parks, and I went to MGM Studios back when it was MGM Studios, and my favorite ride that I always wanted to work on was the Great Movie Ride. And it was all MGM movies, but it was classics. It was like James Cagney and Gene Kelly and, Singing in the Rain and Public Enemy. And I can remember being like 12, 13 years old, going to Sound Exchange, which was, or still is, a little like DVD shop. And they sell CDs and stuff there too. But I would be seeking out these movies, and I found them there. And I was watching Public Enemy, and I was watching Singing in the Rain. And that's really where I found my love for movies, was through that exposure.
Yeah. I love Westerns, like all kinds of Westerns. I've seen just about every Western ever made. But then I discovered samurai movies, and I was like, that's just a different interpretation of a Western. And that led me down this whole path of Asian cinema. And it just grew from there in my DVD collection. At one point, I think I had over 10,000 DVDs. And,
wow. Do you still have them?
They are in storage. Yes. They're never to see the light of day again. And the sad thing is I don't even have a hard media player in my house. Like, even if I pulled them out of storage, I don't even have a DVD player to play them on.
They'll be at a vintage shop one day.
Someday,
probably.
maybe. No, I mean,
It's an archive.
Yeah. And I think, we mentioned Criterion on the podcast. I think they do such a great service. And there's other companies like Vinegar Syndrome who restore old random strange films. Not that Criterion specializes in random strange films, but like they preserve these for people to see. And they do such a great job. So I go out of my way to, even though I can't play them, I still buy Criterions when they come out.
Yeah. And another example is I watched Sunset Boulevard, Billy Wilder, but like psychological horror. And I was not expecting that going into that movie. And I was just, it kind of makes you realize that like all this crazy writing and genre, it's been going on for 100 years. Like none of this is new. It's all just different interpretations of it. So.
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. And we sort of mentioned that too. You know, no matter how new your idea, it's just an iteration of something that's come before.
Right.
And there's so much stuff that you dust off and sort of reappropriate and make it new again. Nothing's new. It's been thought of before.
And I liked what you guys said. I didn't take it personal, but I was definitely the person that you guys were talking about when you were making. I'm always the one that Tyler's making references to, and I'm always like, I didn't see that movie. And I like to tell people I've seen a lot of movies, but I also have not seen a lot of movies. And to me, that's exciting because to me, I get to still explore and find out and discover all of these new movies. And it's a way to kind of expand my own thinking. But then I'm also that for other people. Like in my own groups, I'm telling them, my friend Mel, she says, if you know Jesse, you have a list of movies that you have to watch because it comes up in every conversation. I'm just like, you have to check this out, you know? So I think that that's important to go both ways to like.
And I don't want to, like, cult movies like, oh, you know, you need to watch this. You're not going to like everything, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't watch it.
Right. That's a good point.
I don't like Pasolini. I have never liked his movies. They're weird. We were talking about, you know, Salo, which is one of the most gross, disgusting films I think ever made. But I've still watched it. You know, I'm aware of it. I've seen it, and I can appreciate some things. Is there a particular favorite cult film? Don't say Salo.
No. Do you guys consider Deliverance a cult movie?
Sure.
Deliverance, 100%. Yeah, great book, great movie.
Yep, excellent. What about you, Jesse?
Oh, man. Favorite cult movie? I mean, technically, you guys showed Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right?
Yeah.
Is that considered a cult movie?
Yes.
Only because it will never happen again.
Yeah.
Like the studio's working in tandem with each other to make that happen, and how scandalous.
Yeah.
I don't know. I love that movie.
We actually play really obscure films at Second Screen. You've mentioned Roger Rabbit and Tombstone. Like that is not.
Yeah. But also Paris is Burning.
Yeah. No.
You know,
we do a fun one every year for summer.
Yeah.
That's.
We just watched Death Race 2000. You mentioned that with Michael.
Yep.
That was not my cup of tea.
No.
But I still watched.
Didn't like David Carradine and Gimp Mask. No.
What about Phantom of the Paradise? How did you feel about that one?
Oh, that's a good one. I loved that movie. I was into that one. Yeah. That one was good.
I cannot recommend a streaming service more than Criterion or Shudder. They are both wonderfully curated. The movies change out every month. There are great curated sections based on different topics or genres. So if you're interested in getting into cult movies, do yourself a favor, cancel Netflix and get a Criterion subscription or a Shudder subscription. So with that, how are we doing on time, Patrick?
11 minutes.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about?
I have a lot of movie watching to do, apparently.
Just a lot of recommendations, and I want to get everybody else's list.
Well, with that, Jesse, we need to wrap it up. Where can people find us?
We are Loose Framing. We are Loose Framing Podcast. Stream us anywhere you listen to podcasts or watch us on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us at Film Tampa Bay.
And because we brought it up and we sponsor it, make sure you check out Second Screen Cult Cinema. Also on Spotify, we try to do a curated playlist to match the movies we play every month. So you can find us on all social media channels at Second Screen Cult Cinema. Meets once a month. And with that, we'll catch you next time.